Hello and welcome. I'm Steve Clemons, editor-at-large of The Hill. Thanks for joining us for our program today, Complex Generics and the Prescription Drug Landscape, where we'll be exploring complex generic medical alternatives and their possible impacts on the American healthcare system. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our sponsor, the Association for Accessible Medicine, for its support of today's event. According to some recent consumer surveys, nearly 60 million American adults have difficulty affording their prescription drug medicines, even with insurance. That's really a big deal, even with insurance, putting their health and financial priorities at odds. Generic alternatives of complex medicines have the potential to generate significant savings for both patients and the healthcare system. But market dynamics and regulatory complexities are seen as significant hurdles. What policies can be put into place to safely accelerate evaluation and approval timelines and development processes? Could legislation like next year's reauthorization of the generic drug user fee amendments create opportunities for policy changes? And what does all this mean for patients? Let's put patients right at the middle. We're going to try and do that through today's conversations. We're going to be putting these questions and more in front of our fantastic lineup of speakers. First, a couple of housekeeping notes. You can tweet us at The Hill Events, all one word, The Hill Events, using the hashtag TheHillRx. We're broadcasting live. We'll be taking your questions throughout the program. And please send me questions because I need help on this subject, and many of you are going to know more than I do, so we're going to have fun with this. As with any live stream, you could experience some trouble. They say refreshing the page should, in most cases, fix the problem. My first guest today is Dr. Sally Choe. She's the director of the FDA's Office of Generic Drugs within the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. Dr. Choe, welcome. So as I said, I admitted my humility in this arena, and we're looking to you as an expert. We're talking a little bit about complex generics, and I think the best place to start is to explain to our audience what some of the lines are between these different lines of drugs. What is a complex generic? How is it differentiated between other parts of the drug portfolio?
Thank you, Steve. Yes, the generic drugs are copies of a brand name medications with some allowable differences, such as having different colors or flavorings. Generic drugs can be considered in two large buckets of traditional and complex. And examples of more traditional non-complex generic drugs would be like immediate release medications such as ibuprofen tablets or statin tablets where we have a lot of experience in developing. The complex generic drugs, as the word complex indicates, these are the generic drugs that actually have complex active ingredients, complex dosage form formulations, complex routes of delivery, or complex drug device combination products. Some examples of complex drug products include topical creams, the ophthalmologic gels, auto-injectors, inhalers, extended release tablets, or abuse-deterrent opioid tablets.
Well, with that, I think in the process of looking at this question, and obviously, I think if patients want a drug or if industry wants to move with the drug, obviously the focus they put on it is timing and when can things come in. And so there's a time element. But your job is to keep the public safe. So how does the process work in terms of assuring safety, but also bringing new products into the market?
Yes, definitely there are standard ways of assessing these generic products. And when the generic industry actually submits their application, there is a very specific goal date that is actually being set up. So that most of the original, the generic drug applications, when they're submitted, that we have a goal date of meeting the 10 months clock of approving or giving that action on those drug products.
Dr. Choe, we have a question actually we're taking. I'm just going to weave it in because it's a question I would ask. And I'm not sure it's the FDA's role, but Derek Gingery, the senior writer for the Pink Sheet, asked, how can the FDA spur interest in complex generics that currently have no competition? So it's an interesting question. So sometimes, you'll get a generic in the market, but it won't be widely shared. So do you have concerns? And is that an appropriate role for the FDA to say, hey, or is that beyond your purview, is actually to look at market competition?
Well, we do actually recognize challenges in this area, and we actually have done ways to promote the complex generic drug development. For example, last year in 2020, FDA awarded a grant to establish the Center for Research on Complex Generics to support the generic drug industry researchers and other stakeholders by offering collaborative research and training through webinars, workshops, laboratory projects and complex generic scholars program. So we're hoping this kind of cutting edge center will stimulate the innovative, the dialogue, and disseminate current understanding of complex products and practices, and generate new knowledge in support of complex generic drugs. And this type of a forum where we actually give workshops and speaking engagements, we're trying to promote the importance of the complex generic drug development.
It's fascinating. So I'm going to ask you an unfair question, but I'm enjoying this. I hope you are. You know, we're going to have a speaker on later who's talking about, the complex generic drugs that have been, made available in places like Canada or Europe. I guess my question to you as a scientist and also as a regulator is to what degree, and I don't know how to put this, how can we get the science table even? When you watch COVID and you watch vaccine development, there's a lot of exchange between governments and private sector and also internationally. Do we have that same standard between the sort of US FDA and what's going on in Europe? Because a lot of people raise the fact that in Europe they have certain drugs available that we don't have in the United States. So I guess as a scientist and regulator, do we need to put more infrastructure there, or is it the way it should be now?
Well, I believe the FDA actually is the number one world leader in this area. And maybe it might not be as visible to you, but they're actually having a lot of collaboration between the FDA and other regulatory agencies in other countries. And there's always that constant dialogue. There's ICH related meetings, and there's just a lot of collaboration that goes on, even in terms of during this COVID-19 pandemic situations, in terms of even the inspections and in other areas, that there is definitely a good communication and collaboration going on. And therefore, definitely we're not operating in any isolation, and we're fully aware of other countries' efforts in what they are doing. And but I still believe that we actually are leading the world in terms of developing this complex generic drug in this area.
Sally, let me ask you another unfair question. That's a great answer. Let me ask you another unfair question. You, more than anyone else, sees the pipeline, because I think, all these pharmaceutical firms, generic firms, they're filing with you for approvals. You're going through. So you see much more than anyone else. In fact, I think that's pretty much a black box to many folks. I know that people go through processes. But let me just ask you a question. Do you feel that around the corner, both on generics, but also in other pharmaceutical devices and other pharmaceutical answers, is this going to be a robust couple of years ahead in terms of new products on the market? Or do you suspect that it's going to be pretty traditional and conventional? We're going to go follow rate? Because I get the sense that we're always on the edge of these real interesting technological revolutions. And I'm wondering if you're feeling that in your pipeline.
Well, actually, the advantage of being in the generic side, as I mentioned, this is a copy of the brand drugs, and therefore, based on the new drug approvals, we can kind of track and estimate when the generics actually might be available. Therefore, it's a lot more transparent and somewhat than maybe the new drug side. And looking at and you asked about how do we feel about the next couple of years. Well, one indication that we see is that we get a lot of questions and inquiries from the generic industry about certain drug product developments, and they can submit those requests through so-called control correspondence. And we've been seeing an incredible number of increase in this control correspondence. What that tells us is that there is a high interest, there's an incredible amount of interest in the generic industry who want to develop the generics going forward. And therefore, I do believe that the pipeline in generic area is quite strong.
Dr. Choe, let me ask you one question. You deal with industry. Your role is not to be cozy with industry or to necessarily make industry work better, but you do have to work together. If you were to give a bit of advice to industry that's on the other side of this, what are some of the common things that you think would improve the drug and generic development process? What are some of the missing parts of the bridge, if you will, between successfully bringing these next generation products? What does industry and the public need to understand that it might not?
Generic drug industry actually has, I think, has advanced in many past several years, many actually years, and there are I think what they can do is they can take advantage more of all the programs that we actually offer. For example, for the complex generic drugs that we have implemented a pre-ANDA meeting. And this is a type of meeting that the generic industry can actually take advantage of requesting a meeting to talk about their complex generic drug development and the regulatory expectations. And these are available to them. And also the industry actually completing the quality application for us. That makes a lot of the time saving, the effort saving in terms of us making the action and the decision on these approvals. I have to say though, since especially the GDUFA, the user fee program, I think there has been a lot of improvements and advancement in communication, the quality of the application in the industry side, as well as transparency in our review process. And therefore, going forward, I think that this area is going to be even better and more collaborative than before.
Just real quick, Dr. Choe, because I'm about to talk to Dr. Alex Brill from the American Enterprise Institute, who's an expert on a lot of these issues. Is it your sense that bringing these complex generic drugs really does impact the bottom line cost to patients? Do you sense that the role you and the FDA are playing is leading there? Because we haven't had enough time in this talk to talk about the cost of drugs, cost of healthcare, and there are a lot of players in that world. We should admit. But I'm just interested. Do you think that you're having an impact on that? That complex generics are having an impact on the bottom line that patients feel?
Actually, I'm glad you asked that question because I do want to share some numbers with you.
Oh, great.
While FDA doesn't really control the drug pricing, our policies do affect the competition in the market. And we know that more generics on the market lead to more competition, which can drive prices down. There's some statistics that I have. If multiple generic drug companies market the same product, competition can result in about 85% price reduction from the brand name. And because of generic medicine, Americans actually saved $313 billion in health care costs in 2019. And also 90% of the prescription filled in the US during 2019 was dispensed as generics, but accounts for only 20% of all drug spending. And lastly, the 92% of the generic prescriptions were filled at less than $20. The average generic copay in 2019 was $6.97 compared to the average brand name copay, which was $56.32. To me, these numbers speak loud. And what that means is that we need to bring more generics, more complex generic products to the market for competition so that we can actually help the price going down.
Well, Dr. Sally Choe, I regret because I'm enjoying this and I've learned a lot more than I thought I could get into my head in this arena. But Dr. Sally Choe, Director of the Office of Generic Drugs at the FDA, really appreciate you giving us a little insight into the process and the impact on complex generic drugs. Thank you so much.
Thank you.